Well, thank you very much indeed. And it's lovely to see a sort of group of people here interested in the developments and also the collaboration, because the link of ICS to IUGA at the standardization level has been profoundly important to taking us forward and taking the community forward. The standardization background is a strength of the ICS historically, and exactly as Ted mentioned, this range of terms which people really were not using in the same way was chaotic. And the introduction of a coherent approach to standardization has just been so obviously important. And this is perhaps our champagne year, the 2002 documents, which I think are the linchpins that have really given the credence, the credibility to this organization. And that is, of course, the standardization of terminology of lower urinary tract function and the good urodynamic practices document. These have been fundamental because they have been the flag around which people can rally for terminology. And then the practice of urodynamics, which has been so disparate, this document really brought it together to make a sensible, logical approach, allowing different units really to be able to compare their findings. So I think the ICS has to look back with huge pride on this particular aspect of their history, and something that we need to exploit and prolong to really take it forward. And I think this is where we've really made the difference in the last few years. Of course, the ICS has really been very strong in recent years in ensuring good governance. And one of the criticisms that we may have had of standardizations in the past is that they've tended to have a feel about them as if they were a group of friends, the chairman's chums, perhaps, which is an unfair view of looking at it, but a perception that really we could not allow to persist. Now, how we've addressed this has actually been a very important aspect a few years ago, with my predecessor, Dirk de Ridder, as chairman of the Standardization Committee, working with Peter Rosier and the named individuals there to formalize a governance process, to really make sure that we have got an evidence base, as the modern practice requires that we should always review evidence, but then also an unbiased approach, one in which we can be objective, impartial, with the conflicts of interest declared, and transparency, making sure that a member of a committee or working group is genuinely and visibly contributing. Now, the observant amongst you will notice that up until the publication of this document, it was the Standardization Committee. Basically, those were the people that largely did the generation of these documents. But this introduced a change. We've now become a steering standardization committee. We oversee working groups. The point being that these working groups are very much then able to work according to a defined scope and to include experts who have got direct expertise in the area under discussion. So the steering committee can stay remote, can stay impartial, and can ensure that that working group is working according to the expectation of the scope, compliant with good working practices, making appropriate progress, reflective of the relevant stakeholders, which must be the relevant clinical specialties, the allied health professions, the industry, and the patient, all of which must be properly represented so far as possible. And then the steering committee evaluates the end result of a working group to make a recommendation after public consultation to the ICS trustees, who take final responsibility. So the first of the working groups to report that has followed this route has been the urodynamic equipment performance. But then what you're going to find in the next year or two is a whole tranche of standardization documents that have followed this approach. Crucially, We're going to have the Good Urodynamics Practices Review, which Peter Rosier is leading on. That will publish in the foreseeable future, and so will neurourology. Nocturia, basic science, perhaps the underactive bladder, containment products, and chronic pelvic pain. These are all documents that are in a good state of progression. And then, of course, we come to something that's been a real bedrock of the last few years, which is our collaboration with IUGA. And upcoming, we have got several documents that will really make a very valuable difference. But this isn't just out of the blue. This is built on a very strong collaboration reflected in the paper that Bernie Halen was the lead author for in 2010, which is in effect a lower urinary tract function for women. And that's been a very valuable review of the literature and generation that's really made a contributory input, drawing in the gynecological profession very actively. And it goes beyond that, for example, with the complications calculator, which you can find on the websites of the respective organizations. This is an ongoing and growing collaboration. And Bernie is here, and Joe Lee, who's the successor to Bernie as chairman of the Standardization and Terminology Committee, has been an active contributor. And we see these chaps each year really taking part. Now, over the last year or two, we've really been starting to think about how can we make sure that alongside the development and the governance, that we can really make these documents accessible. Simple publication with access through PubMed is a kind of anachronistic approach, and we need to be much more amenable to the modern opportunities of the digital age. We also need to make sure that we are focusing on the education and responding to the needs of people who may have concerns or requirements in order to practice. So obviously we've progressed with the development, and that's really what the last slide is about. And the governance indeed. But the access and education, I think we can be very proud as an organization with the ICS Wiki, which has just taken off in the most extraordinary way and really has drawn in the much wider community. We've also been able to develop a glossary based on Halen et al. 2010 and Abrams et al. 2002, and that is accessible through the ICS website. But then we come on to the fact that many people are not necessarily specialists in the area. They have some interest, but not to the extent that they will spend many hours seeking out documents or reading large documents. And furthermore, many people are non-native English speakers, so we have made core versions, undertaken translations, run workshops, and many other activities to just really get going with the wider community. So the workshops, the direct contact, the survey that we have continuously running, the wiki, and the Bladder Diary Day, these have all been initiatives to just capture comment and bring people into the community. So you'll see that in your delegate's bag when you arrived was a standardization folder in which some of these simple, short versions, which you can read in 10 minutes, are present. And this will be substantially more when it comes to next year's delegate's bag, if we get the funding. And the wiki, now this has been, I think, an absolute triumph for which Beth Shelley has to be absolutely applauded. The wiki is an amazing structure, and as you can see, 104,000 hits so far in 2015. Boy, is it taking off. So please bookmark and visit. Awareness of continence terms and your place for comments. Isn't that exactly what we need? Challenges, though. And Jane Mailing personally seems to be the patient representative, and I wish we could get more Janes, either by cloning or breeding or whatever it is. But Jane, reproduce somehow. Public involvement has been a real problem. Professional engagement, I find quite disappointing, actually. I find that many of our colleagues are simply not receptive. They persist in this same old attitude. What's wrong with what I do already? Who cares about BPH? Who thinks there's something better than the International Prostate Symptom Score? Ha! Waste of time. Now, the point about this picture is perhaps why we have a problem with engagement. And those of you here who've actually read a full standard when you were in training. Now, I read Abrams et al. 2002, and I read Schaefer et al. 2002 in one day. To be honest, this is how I felt at the end of it. My brain was fit to explode. And so I think we really need to be starting to think about education and simplification to really focus on what really matters to our colleagues in the wider community. It's fine for us to work with these substantial standards, but we need to be thinking about how to address what others need. And so the strategy at the moment is to have some core fundamental documents that will in effect be the hub. This is what you need to know in lower urinary tract function. And manageable. You can read this in a suitable length of time from start to finish, understand it immediately, and see where to go for more detailed information. And so next year we're revising the Abrams et al. Function of lower urinary tract function. This will become that hub document which will signpost to all those others, the chronic pelvic pain, the neurourology, and the others. But likewise, good urodynamic practices, it's a long document. And if we have new colleagues that are new to the field, they really need to have the basics. Start with them and then move on to the full good urodynamic practices document. So we will have a hub fundamentals of urodynamic practice document. The key things in 4 pages with signposting to the important publications of good urodynamic practices, pressure flow studies, and urodynamic equipment. And this, I hope, will be the draw so that those in training can read those in an hour and not feel like that python that swallowed a porcupine. So where we are, the ICS has taken us from this situation to this situation. Here we have Abrams and Schaefer et al. 2002 and the modern day governance. But I'm a little bit worried that unless we really get on with these fundamentals documents, we're going to start looking a bit like that. So those fundamentals documents will turn us into this, a dynamic organization, responsive, receptive, educating and drawing in the entire community of physicians and health professionals working in this field, not just the select elite experts. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you.